Welcome to another Yarnspirations tutorial. I'm your host Brittany, and today I'll demonstrate how to crochet the Summer Ripple Afghan. The first thing you'll need to do is download your free pattern from Yarnspirations.com, and while you're on that page, you can pick your color palette and order your yarn right there. Now, let's see how to crochet the stitch pattern for the Summer Ripple Afghan. One of the greatest things to me about a ripple pattern is that it looks really complex, but when you break it down, it's usually pretty simple. So the first thing we're going to do is start off our throw with our slip knot and our chain. Now I'm just going to work with a little snippet of the pattern, but you will go ahead and chain the total number that's listed in your pattern, just like you see here. One little tip I want to leave you with here is when you're trying to keep track of a large number of chains, specifically 210, that's our foundation chain number for this throw, we don't want to have to count those over and over if we lose track. So what I like to do is count in large groups and then place a stitch marker there. So I might work through 50 chains, and you can assign whatever number you want, whatever you're comfortable with, and then just place your stitch marker in that last chain. So I would put this on chain number 50, and then I never have to count back to the very beginning. I can just count back to where my stitch marker is and then add 50 to that because I know that's how many I had when I counted. Once you have your foundation chain and you're ready to move on to the first row, which is our setup row, I want to mention that you'll want to pay very close attention throughout this first row. This is like our setup row, and if you have any mistakes here, it's going to throw off your rows after you've worked this one. So the first thing we need to do is find the fourth chain from the hook. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, and 4. And for me, what I like to do is work in the back bump of the chain. So I'll flip it over so I can see that back bump, and I'm going to work a double crochet into that fourth chain from the hook. And what we're doing here on the edge is we're setting up our edge on one side and also on the other side, and then we're going to have a repeat in the middle. So we're kind of breaking this row into two different sections, and we're going to continue on with a short repeat where we're going to skip the next chain and double crochet into the next. We want to do that a total of 3 times. So skip one, double crochet in the next, skip one, double crochet in the next. Now when we're looking at our work like this, think of it as we're starting here down at the very bottom of one of the ripples, and we're working up, and now we're up at the top, and we need to create that really sharp turn, and that's what we're going to do with the next 2 stitches. So find your next chain, and we're going to make 5 double crochets into that chain. And again, this is one of those little sections where you really want to pay attention to the number of stitches that you've worked. It's always a good idea to just go back and count and make sure you're on the right track. Then we're going to find the next chain and do the same thing. We're going to work 5 double crochets into the next chain. Now if we take a look at our work, we can see this is the top point of our ripple, and now we're ready to work back down. Next, we're going to find our next chain, so the one that's right next to this big group of 5, and we'll double crochet into that chain. And then we're ready to work our pattern that looks like this one over here. we're really doing the same thing over and over with this ripple pattern, but it's a little bit deceiving when we're looking at the written instructions. So the first thing that we want to do is skip the next chain and double crochet into the next. And this is another one of those repeats. So we want to do this a total of 8 times. So I'll just count that out. So that's my first one. I'm going to skip one, double crochet into the next for number 2. Skip one, double crochet in the next for number 3. Skip one, double crochet in the next for the 4th one. You get the idea here. We're going to work this all the way until we get to the 8th. Now here's what our ripple is starting to look like after we finish that first part of our repeat. And then the next thing we want to do is find the next chain. We're going to double crochet 5 times into that next chain because now we've made it to the top of the next point of our ripple. Then we're going to work 5 double crochet in the next chain. So this is just like we did for that previous ripple. Only this is part of the big repeat. So you're going to see this spelled out in between your little asterisks in your pattern. This is going to be the big repeat that you work throughout the entire first row. And now the last stitch in the repeat is to find our next chain, and we're going to double crochet there. Now for you, you're going to be working with your big giant chain, right? I have just a little snippet of the pattern here. So you're going to repeat that last little section where we started here, we skipped one and we DC'd into the next. We did that 8 times, and then up at the top of the ripple, we made 5 double crochets in those 2 chains up at the top, and we wrapped it up with that final double crochet right next to it. Now you're going to repeat that until you get to your last 8 chains. And when that's the case, we're going to work just a few stitches here so it basically mirrors this side over here. So once you've made it to the end of your row and you have just 8 chains remaining, we're going to work a very simple pattern just so that it looks the same on this side as it does over here. So I'm going to skip the next chain and double crochet into the next. And that's my repeat. I want to do that 4 times. So that is my first. Skip one, double crochet in the next. For 2, skip one, double crochet. That's 3. Now I should have just 2 left. I'm going to skip one and double crochet into the last. And once you make it to the end of your first row, all of the hard work is done because now we have a foundation and we can work a little bit more off of what we're seeing visually rather than relying on the written instructions. Once we understand how the stitches are supposed to be placed and how they work within the pattern, it's so much easier to just follow along with what you see rather than what you read. Now, believe it or not, this stitch pattern, although it looks very intricate, is just a 1-row pattern repeat after we have worked through this foundation or this setup row, the first row. Then what we're going to do is chain 2, and this is going to be the start and how to work through all of the remaining rows after this. That chain 2 is not counting as a stitch. What we want to do is go ahead and double crochet in the first. So basically right where that chain 2 is coming from. And then we're working up. So we're going to be working with those double crochet and skip a stitch. So I'm going to skip the next one, double crochet in the next. And we're going to do this a total of 4 times. So you can either count as you go. So skip 1, double crochet in the next. This will be number 2 for me. Skip 1, double crochet. Skip 1 and double crochet. Now that's going to get you all the way to the top. And what you want to kind of keep an eye on is your 2 groups of 5. So I'm kind of pulling them apart. And you're going to work your 2 groups of 5 again for each of the rows afterwards. You're going to do it in the 2 that are right in the very center. So I'm going to look at this one right here. I know this is basically the last stitch in this big group of 5. Well, I want to work 5 double crochet into that stitch. And that's kind of your visual cue. As long as you sort of memorize the pattern a little bit and you know what to expect and you know where to work them, you really don't have to rely on the written instructions so much. And once you get that big group worked, you're going to look over at your very next stitch. We're going to double crochet 5 times into that, but also take note where the stitch is positioned on the row below. It's another one of the last stitches in that big group. And we're always going to finish up the repeat with a double crochet right next to where that last group of 5 is. And so that's the setup. So we have the first part of our second row worked out. It looks something like this. And now we're ready to work in this little dip in between the ripples. And the way we do that is to skip 1 and double crochet into the next. We want to do that a total of 8 times. So this should all be very familiar to you. Even though we're on the second row, we're working the same stitches. It just maybe looks and feels a little bit different because we're working in stitches now rather than chains. Do a nice little self-check there. Make sure I have 8 stitches because I know I'm at the point where I need to work that big fan up at the top. I'm just looking, I'm finding these end stitches on these 2 groups of 5. That's where I'm going to work my 5 double crochets again. And we have to make sure that we're always working these into these 2 stitches specifically, because if we're off by 1, then our ripple, rather than being nice and uniform, it's going to sit a little bit crooked. And if you work through your row and maybe you notice at the end that things aren't working out right, that maybe your ripple is off a little bit, unfortunately, you will have to rip back to that point in order to straighten out your repeat. And that's why it's always a really good idea to just count and make sure that you're taking your time, paying attention to where these big groups are going. So I've got my 5 there. I want to work 5 more into the next. Then we always finish up our repeat with 1 double crochet in the very next stitch. Now once again for you, that's going to be your repeat until you get to the end of the row. So again, we're starting right here and then we're repeating this section over and over until we get to the end. Then when you get to the end of your row, you want to make sure you have just 8 stitches remaining. We're going to work that repeat to get us back down. So I'm going to skip 1, double crochet in the next. Skip 1, double crochet. Skip 1, double crochet. Then skip 1 and double crochet. Now that you have a good understanding of the stitch pattern repeat, the other repeat we're going to need to keep track of while we're working through this pattern is the color pattern repeat. And this is what makes the written instructions look more involved than what they actually are, because it spells everything out for you color repeat by color repeat. So it gives you the different rows and colors A, B, and C. We're working with 3 here. So I want to demonstrate how to transition to that first color when you're ready to do so. And what I like to do is go ahead and trim the working yarn of the color that I'm finished with. And I also want to take it one step further. So my last stitch here was a double crochet, and I want to just undo those last 2 loops. So the last yarn over and pull through 2. Sometimes it's easier if you just take it and very easily pull the strand so that those 2 loops are exposed, and place those on my hook. Then when I go ahead and fasten on the new color, I'm going to yarn over and pull through these 2 with a new color, and that's going to fasten on. It's also going to finish this stitch. You can use a slip knot to do this if you'd like, if you want a little bit of extra security, but I find that it's really not necessary, because once I yarn over and pull through 2 with the new color, then what I do is I take the 2 tails and I tie them together. And now you're ready to move on to your second row. So the stitch pattern here is no different. I'm going to chain 2, turn my work, but what I want to demonstrate is one way that you can avoid weaving in your ends. Since we are changing our colors so much, you can work over these and then you don't have to weave them in later. So what I like to do is take them in my 2 fingers back there and hold on to them and just lay it along the top of the work. And as you work your stitches, then I'm just going to make sure I trap them and lock them in place. So I have the first one, I'm going to skip 1, double crochet in the next. And I'll work over these as much as I possibly can. The more you work over them, the more secure they're going to be. And I would especially like to get to the point, at least to the top of that first ripple, where I'm working the big group of 5 over top of these tails, because that's really going to lock it in place. Here we're skipping a stitch in between, so it is somewhat exposed, and this is really going to just lock it in place. Now once you've worked over those ends for as long as you possibly can, honestly you can go ahead and just trim these 2 tails off. They're nice and secure. If you have some left over like I do here, you could go ahead and weave them back under like these 2 big groups of 5, because that's going to give it a lot more security. But it's perfectly safe to just trim it, and then we don't have to worry about those anymore. So I like to break this pattern down into sections so it seems a little bit more manageable. We've already worked through the stitch pattern repeat. We understand how to change colors when our pattern tells us to, and that's the majority of the entire ripple throw. All we're going to do is just repeat the same stitch pattern and the same technique to change colors that's indicated in our pattern. It has been an absolute pleasure demonstrating this stitch pattern and color pattern technique. If you have any questions whatsoever, I want to let you know that I'm here for you. You can always reach out to me on social. I'm at BHooked on Instagram, at BHookedCrochet on Facebook, and I'm more than happy to help. I would also love to see your Afghans when they're done. There's so many different color options that you can go with, and each color option is going to make each Afghan unique. So be sure to share those with me on social, and I look forward to serving you in the next tutorial. We'll see you then, guys.